Namaste and welcome to Dragonfly Cookery and Knives. In this video, we're going to be talking about a subject that I think in the knife community we tend to be a little neglectful about. Now, we talk about knives all day long, and we talk about a lot of different knives and a lot of uses for those knives and designs about those. How well does those knives follow with their designed purpose? How well do they do? How well do they work? And most of us who've been collecting knives find this information very useful and beneficial to us. But this video is going to be more for the general guy, the guy who's maybe has one knife that he bought that he's not really happy with. It's done okay in functioning for him, but all in all, he could have chosen a better knife, and he knows it. Or he's a person who doesn't have a knife and is thinking about buying a knife and doesn't really know where to go. How to even approach the subject? Isn't a knife a knife a knife? Don't all knives cut the same? So what I'm going to talk about in this next 3 videos, it's going to be a 3-video series, is going to first be about the anatomy of a knife. What is a knife? What's the difference between a fixed blade and a folder? And then we'll get into all the anatomy of the knife and different types of hand, like grind styles, points, different types of tips on the knife, what they're designed for or what they're called, and also an overview of the different types of tangs. And then we'll conclude on that with a couple examples of knives that I have that fit into those categories so we can kind of get a visualization of it. Then in the next video, we're going to talk about the materials of the blades that help the form follows function. And that's going to be a term that you're going to hear me use throughout this series a lot. And that is, I'm a knife designer. I'm not a blacksmith. So I do have my limitations of knowledge. I couldn't get in there and tell you how to forge a blade. Other than by theory or by watching, Forged in Fire like the rest of you, I can pretty much get a good gist of what goes into making a knife. But when you're actually out there thinking about using a knife, there is a very specific design intent behind how each of those knives were built and made, whether they were handmade or production made. So, and in that case, I have gone to the drawing board a lot of times and drawn up my own designs and have had friends of mine who are blacksmiths make those blades for me. And some have turned out very, very well, and some could be a bit better. But there is a purpose behind the building and make of the knives that relate to form follows function and the materials that they use, the type of steel, the type of handle materials, and the type of scabbards or sheaths that they use. So we're going to talk about that in the second video. In the third video, we're going to take all that information, the anatomy of the knife, what makes a knife, a folder, fixed blade versus a folder, whether you want a full tang, a partial tang, stick tang, you're going to have an understanding what those are. And then you're also going to learn about the materials, the type of steel that's used, the type of handle material that's used, and also the type of sheath and scabbard. And you're going to fit that into what you think you need this knife to do and what it's for. And where do you go to get it? How do you choose it? How do you pick it up? How do you judge that knife from, there's a lot of full tang knives, for instance, and you determine you need a full tang. And you'll find 100 different full tang knives. You're going to sit there and go, okay, which one should I use? Should I take? So we're going to talk about how to make that, use all this information that I'm giving you to make a quality decision for either that one knife you want to buy and use for all your purposes, or you're going to use that knife for a specific purpose, or maybe you want to get 3 knives for different specific purposes, 3 or 4, or you could be like me and start collecting knives. I collect knives and also sell them, and I also design them. So I'm a real knife enthusiast who's, as my wife says, you're addicted to knives, and I have to admit I think I am. Anyways, with that being said, I'm going to use an analogy. I'll try to keep it real quick and brief, but I think it really applies. Let's say you want to take up the hobby of playing golf, and there's a golf store close to the golf range near you. So you figure you're going to go there and visit it and pick out some clubs and see if you can hire somebody to teach you how to play golf. You want to pick up that, you think that hobby would be really good for you. So you go into that shop and you see a bag of clubs and the price seems to fit your budget. So you're almost ready to pick that bag of clubs up and head to the counter to buy it. But a very knowledgeable clerk comes up to you, the store salesman, who also is a golf enthusiast. He plays golf and he also teaches golf. And so he comes up to you and he says, "Can I help you?" And you say, "Well, I'm thinking about buying this set of clubs because I want to take up the hobby of playing golf." And he says, "Well, that's great to hear. I'm glad you want to pick up this hobby. It's very enjoyable. You'll really love it. But I want you to kind of consider that maybe you want to put a little bit more thought about the clubs that you pick up. Because I'll tell you something, if you just grab some clubs in a bag and head out, like you go to Walmart and buy it, and then head to the golf course, your experience of learning golf might be a little bit more difficult than it needs to be, and it might be downright insufferable to where you will give up before you even give it a chance. So can I make some suggestions?" You say, "Sure." So what he does is he says, "Well, let me show you some clubs, but before we do, I'm going to measure you." "Why are you going to measure me?" "Well, because the golf clubs, the shafts, are designed for the person that's going to be swinging them. So we need to take your measurements for how tall you are and what your length of arm is, and then we're going to match you with the clubs that are going to be suited for your physique, so that the clubs will work for you rather than against you, where it'll be an enjoyable experience, at least in swinging the club, than it will be you fighting with the club because it's the wrong size for you." "Oh, that sounds reasonable." So you go along with it, and then he starts matching you with the clubs. So, number one, using the right tool that is made for you and for the purpose in which you're going to use it for is very important on what that experience is going to be like for you. If you have a knife that hurts your hand when you use it, guess what? It's going to end up in the garage, in the toolbox, or not in the toolbox. It'll be on a shelf somewhere that you'll look at and you'll say, "That's a pretty knife, but boy, it sure hurts. I don't like using it." And you never use it. Whereas a knife that feels great in the hand and you use it, you're like, "Man, I wish, where's my knife? I need my knife." And you're going to make sure that it's either attached to your belt or in your pocket, if it's a fold or if it's a fixed blade. So, right with that, I'm going to jump into the anatomy of a knife. And I'm going to have a lot of visuals to show you. Most of it's paper materials for starts, and then I'll try to fill in with some knives that I have that demonstrate this. First of all, this is my illustration number one. This is a fixed blade. So fixed blade has no moving parts, and it has the blade and the handle all integrated together, one way or another. And this particular one would be called a full tang, in that this tang is one solid piece with the knife. Now the tang is this part. The blade is this part. Your handle, or where your hand goes, is what's called the handle. Your cutting edge is right here where this bevel is to create that cutting edge. This is called the side or the cheek of the blade. This is the bevel of the blade, the cutting edge, the belly, the tip. And a lot of handles, some of them will have a cross guard, which is sometimes called a quillion, that protects your hand. It's a hand guard from keeping your hand from sliding up on the cutting edge, particularly if it's used for stabbing. And in this particular case, you have finger choils, which is part of what is called, they call it a sub-hilt, or this part where the bolster would be. If it's not a hand guard, it might be a polished bolster or a piece of metal here that kind of adds to the aesthetics of the blade, but also lets you know that you're near. If you're holding it just by feel, you'll feel the difference between the texture of the handle slabs and that bolster, and you know you're getting close to the cutting edge if you're kind of blind handling the knife. So this is the geometry of that knife. This is the kind of like all, when we're talking about the tip of the blade, the grind of the blade, the handle of the blade, the tang of the blade, you're going to have an overall understanding that this is what we're talking about. Now this is a top view of a knife. This has a distal taper. In other words, it goes wider at the handle and comes to a very sharp point. It tapers down to that point. That helps reduce the weight of the blade and makes it easier to handle. There are some that the thickness of the spine of the blade. This is the spine of the blade, the top portion of that blade. That spine can be the same thickness all the way to that final bevel to the tip. That makes it even stronger, as far as, especially if you're going to chop something, or your tip's not going to bend or break on you. These are slab handles on a full tang. That full tang, the tang part is exposed. A good example of that I have before me would be this particular knife here. This knife has a full tang. It has rivets that hold the slabs onto this tang, has a lanyard hole, very similar to the design of the knife that we have here, in that it has your finger choil. This one doesn't have bolsters, but here's your flat of the blade, your spine. This has a convex edge, which we're going to talk about, but so there's not really much of a secondary bevel here that you can see, but here's the grind on it, your spine, the tip, the belly, your handle, with scales. Full tang. And this one does have a slight taper like the illustration showed. So this is a good example of a fixed blade knife with its that illustrate the definitions that we just talked about. Now, another type of knife is the folding knife. The difference between a folding knife and a fixed blade knife is folding knife has moving parts. A fixed blade knife does not. So usually a folding knife has a locking mechanism that when the blade is open, it will lock it. Some of those locking mechanisms you will hear a liner lock, or it'll have a scale lock, or it'll have a particular locking system that it escapes me what cold steel is termed, but they have a very unique and specific trademarked, patented locking system that makes their folders with its moving parts very strong and durable. So there's a lot of different locking mechanisms. In this particular anatomy here is you're going to have the same anatomy for your knife. You're going to have the flat, you're going to have the bevel, you're going to have the spine of the back of the blade, the tip, the belly, but you're not going to have a long tang. That tang usually stops right where the moving mechanisms are. It doesn't go any further. The rest of it is a handle that might have a liner inside and scales on the outside, and then whatever locking mechanism. There's always a rod in the center in which that blade will pivot on to open and close. It'll have a stopping point, so it won't flip all the way around to the other side unless it's really badly broken. If your knife does that, it's time to get another knife or take it to a smithy to fix it for you. But it will move. Now, sometimes there's a little groove here for your thumbnail to open it. Those are not assisted openings. Those are manual opening folders. You might have a thumb ramp that sits on top of the blade. Cold steel has those that you would flick it up with that. Or you might have what is called a thumb stud that sticks out of the side of the blade that allows you to open. There's also what's called flippers, and the flippers can be either up at the top or down at the bottom that allows you to assist open that blade. Or it'll be up here at the top and it ends up down here at the bottom. It's actually what happens. Is you'll flick it there and it'll open up and it comes down here. So that is pretty much what is the overall anatomy of a folding blade. Now, in this series of videos, I'm going to be talking more about fixed blade knives because they cover a larger range of uses that a knife would be used for. But folding knives are very, very important and very useful, and especially for everyday carry. If you want a knife with you at all times, a folder is excellent. You can fit it in your pocket, or you can put it in a little belt sheath and put it on your belt. And it's handy, and it's always there and available for you to use. And usually the size of them are small enough to fit most cities and states' knife requirements. As long as that clip is exposed where it can be seen, it's not considered a concealed weapon. So it can be a useful tool that you carry with you at all times. So there's a definite need and definite use for folders. I carry one with me all the time. So just because I'm going to be talking mostly about fixed blade knives, don't think I don't like folders. I do. Then we're going to talk about the various different types of knife, shape and designs, and tips. Here's your basic knife style. You have what most of you will be able to recognize as a clip point, which is what most Bowie knives, when we think of Bowie knives, have. Here's a drop point, very suitable and very good for hunters. A spear point. You have a dagger point, which is usually sharp on both sides. You have, in this case, the American Tanto style and the Japanese Tanto style, which was, of course, the American Tanto was borrowed from that, and this is a very traditional Japanese style, very useful and very pertinent style. Then you have a kukri style blade, which is like this. This is a kukri. So that's a style of blade, which is a recurve. Then you have a trailing point, which is very good from Indonesia areas, a talon, needle point, sheepfoot point. There's all kinds of various different styles of and shapes of blades, and there is a form follows function with every single one. Now we're going to talk about tangs, the different types of tangs. Now tangs, when people think of tangs, they think of what's the strongest and the weakest. So I put a little arrow here on the side showing what's the weakest and what's the strongest. But I'm also going to show you an example of a 100-year-old knife that has the weakest and yet lasts over 100 years, and I can go out and use it today. So that when we say weakest and strongest, it's very misleading, because this could last you several lifetimes with the right handle materials if it was built and constructed properly. But here we go. We have the full tang. We have a encapsulated or semi-full tang. You have your hidden rat-tailed or stick tang, which usually is threaded at the end and allows for it to attach to a butt cap. You have a half tang, which is also known as a push tang or tapered tang. It can also be a partial tang, in that it doesn't extend all the way to the butt cap. It is half a tang. Now, an example of that would be this 100-year-old kukri that dates back to the Victorian period and was probably used during World War I by a Gurkha soldier who was fighting along with the Brits during World War I. This has a very strong and sturdy handle, yet that tang only goes through to about here. It is held on with tree sap and wood shavings that are combined and hardened inside there and makes for a very, very strong handle. This handle is made out of Indian rosewood, and it is a kukri, very heavy blade used for chopping and cutting and as a weapon, a secondary arm during World War I by the Gurkha soldiers. This I could go and bang against a tree stump, and I could use it to build shelters and process my firewood and cut up my food for dinner and have no problem or fear of this handle coming off or this blade flying away. Over 100 years old. So here's a good example that even the weakest is extremely strong if it's built right. So, but that's a little background on your different tangs. There's only one other tang in this example that I'm going to show you and I want to talk about, is a skeletonized tang, which still gives you the strength of a full tang, but with those holes or piercings in it, allows it to be lighter. So when you have your handle material in, it has a better balance and feel to the blade, and you're not carrying around too much weight. So there is a reason for that, but that's when somebody talks about a skeletonized handle, that's what they're talking about. Okay, now let's get into the grinds. Here's a quick and fast, easy way, and I'm going to show you another better example of this. But when we're talking about grinds on a blade, these are the main grinds that most knives will have. You have a flat grind, which is like a V shape. You have a Scandi grind or a saber grind, which is straight on or flat on the sides and then bevels down to a point. Or you have a hollow grind, which is a flat side, and then when you get into the blade grind, it actually is a little bit concaved. It hollows out to a very, very sharp edge. And then you have convex, which is my personal favorite, which is rounded at the tip and makes it a very strong cutting edge, allows for chopping but also for slicing and cutting. It's a very durable edge. These are all important things to keep in mind when you're thinking about buying your knife as to what kind of edge, because that will facilitate what your purpose of that knife, or having that knife and using that knife. Now I'm going to use A.G. Russell's blade grinds, because this is really a great example of a lot of the different styles, but one particular one I want to talk about is the chisel grind. The chisel grind, there was a very well-known and well-respected bladesmith, a blacksmith, who, by the name of Phil Hartsfield, I had the pleasure of meeting him, and majority of his knives that he made, and swords, all had a chisel grind. They were extremely sharp, and they will cut through a lot of things. A lot of your Japanese chef blades will use this type of grind, a chisel grind. Now, I'm holding an example of a World War II Filipinos kind of a bolo. There's a specific name for it, but I forget it right now. But it has that chisel grind. It's flat on one side, and then it has that grind and secondary bevel right here on the edge, which makes this an excellent jungle sword or jungle knife, as well as a martial arts weapon that was used during the time of self-defense or during the time of war in World War II. Those of you who practice Salat or Kali will know about the importance of a chisel grind and the usefulness of it. Now, if you were to select this, the reason why you would need to know about this grind is that you also need to learn how to sharpen that type of grind. It's not as easy to sharpen as some of the other grinds. So it's important to think about and educate yourself about different blade grinds. Here's another example. I'm going to pass on that one and follow with this last one. Sometimes you can combine grinds like flat grinds or convex grinds and combine it with maybe a hollow grind, or combine a V grind with a convex secondary bevel. So here we're going to talk about the grinds and then the bevels. And the bevels are at that last geometric shape that's makes that razor sharp edge, that final little point at edge, is called the secondary grind or the secondary bevel. And all knives will have it, whether they have a flat grind, a hollow grind, even a chisel grind, will have that secondary bevel. The only exception to that might be when you get down to the convex edge, because sometimes you'll have that follow all the way down right to the cutting edge, and you really won't see any secondary bevel. But if you used a V grind with that secondary bevel, would be the convex, more rounded type geometry. So that kind of goes over all the geometry of the knives. Now I'm going to give you some examples of some really quick examples of some of the knives that we're talking about here. And let me see if I can find some of my folders. Here they are. So when we're talking about assisted opening or a different type of like for instance, this is Cold Steel's. This is one of theirs. This has the thumb tab right here up at the top. You have your pin here that the knife's going to swivel on when it opens. Now this is designed that you could carry it in your pocket, and when you go to open it, this is going to catch on your pants and as you're pulling it out, it's going to open the blade for you. And that was designed with that purpose and intent. Now they have an actually patented locking system where there's an insert in here, a steel piece, a mechanism that will actually spring up when you open the blade and then locks into place. And there's a locking mechanism in here that holds it very, very strong. Now, cold steel is famous for putting these in vices and hanging weights and everything like that on it to show, and bending it in all different ways to show that it's not going to fail on you, that these are very, very, very strong. They're about as strong as you can get from having a folding knife with moving parts to a fixed blade knife. It's still not going to be as strong as a fixed blade knife, but it will take an awful lot of punishment to get this knife to fail you. It is, and they come in a lot of different sizes. This one's a pretty big size, but I really, really like their folding knives. They're very, very good. Another company I like is Kershaw. This is an assisted opening blade. It has a little bit of a spring, a little resistance to it that allows it to open. And here's your flipper up here at the top. And when I hit that, that opens up and that flipper comes down here and becomes an integrated finger guard. Now this is what's called a liner lock, which allows the liner inside to spring in and lock that blade into place. In order to release it, I have to push it to the side and allow that blade to fold. Another one, this is an old school knife. I had this back in the 90s. This one has a locking mechanism that's very similar to cold steel's, but not as strong, because this can come up and the knife could fold on you under certain extreme conditions. All in all, it's a strong knife. It's going to serve you very well, and a very good locking system. It has been around for a very long time, so it's been time and tested and proven. However, it has the nail slot on the side, which means this is a fully manually opened type of opening mechanism. But once it's open, it's locked into place, and I could put pressure on this knife and cut and slice it and use it for whittling and whatever. It's a very useful design, even though it's old. And it came with a belt scabbard that I can put it in this little pocket, snap it in, and attach it to my belt and have it carried with me. Whereas this has a, and it's reversible. I could choose to, if I'm a left-handed person or a right-handed person, I could choose which pocket I would carry this in. And this clip can be removed and put on, but it's a pocket clip. So I'd have this attached inside my pocket so that a portion of the knife and this could be seen. So if law enforcement wanted to know if I was armed and dangerous, they would be able to see that I have a pocket knife. That's important. You don't want to stick, because it's called a pocket knife, you don't want to stick it in your pocket and have it completely invisible, because then it becomes a concealed carry weapon, and with knives, that's an automatic felony. So always think about that. These things are there for a reason. Now, this is a Kershaw, and this Kershaw allows this clip to be carried either point up or point down. I could take this and put it over here. It is also ambidextrous, so I can do it left-handed or right-handed for this assisted opening knife. Now, assisted opening knives are still legal in most states in America, so because they're not a switchblade. Okay, so that is your folders. To kind of give you some examples, this is a spear point, which is used for hunting. This is actually for boar hunting. Non-sharpened edge up here, yet what makes it a spear point is the tip is dead center to the center of the knife, going from tip to tang. So it is in the center of its geometry there. Chisel point, Japanese style. This is an American style Japanese blade that Lynn Thompson made popular during the early 90s and late 80s. This is the Magnum Tanto, and this has a chisel point tip. It was designed for the purpose to pierce through armor. Now, Lynn Thompson demonstrates this knife in the various different lengths that he makes of it by piercing it through car doors and hoods and stuff like that to show that's very strong. This has a saber grind with a hollow grind. So you have two different grind geometries with a secondary bevel. Full tang encapsulated, so it actually goes all the way to the butt cap, but it's encapsulated by this craton handle. So it's a full tang, very sturdy. This is designed for martial arts, so the pommel is designed for hammer blows. But yet you could still use this for all your other cutting tasks, whatever it could function well at in doing, which we could talk about later in the other videos. Get an example. The last example I'm going to show you is a stick tang that goes all the way to the end. This is a kukri. This is the kukri style blade, which is also called a recurve, and in grind geometry. And in this, it has a fuller that's integrated. It's ground into the blade for a purpose to lighten the blade on the flat of the blade. It has a Scandi grind with a convex edge, so its secondary bevel is convex edge. It has a bolster, your wood handle, stick tang, or rat tail tang that goes all the way in, and instead of being threaded at the end, it actually sticks out at the end and is pinged over at what is called a keeper on this butt plate. This is a very strong and sturdy handle design, tang design, and will last well over 100 years. It will last beyond my lifetime and the lifetime of my son and his kids. So that kind of just gives you some general ideas of various different knives and their styles and the anatomy of knives that we apply to this. So hopefully that was beneficial to you. You learned something, and you can carry this knowledge with you when you are making your knife selection. It's good to understand the anatomy of knives, whether it be a folder or a fixed blade. So in the next video, we're actually going to talk about blade materials, handle materials, scabbard materials, form follows function, or the philosophy of use, and how that all applies. And then in the last video, we're going to talk about taking all this knowledge that I'm giving you and applying it and making intelligent decisions about the knives that you're going to use and carry. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe, please, on Facebook. Like and subscribe on my YouTube channel and leave any comments there. And also leave me some comments at my Facebook page at Blue Dragonfly Trading Post. And also please visit my website where you will find handmade, custom design knives made from Nepal, and also some of my own designs and some of the designs of my friends that you will find on my website at dragonflykookeryandknives.com. Thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned to the next video. God bless and namaste. Thank you.